everyone.
Hello.
The internet said we're live, so it must be.
Must be true.
Yeah. So I can't see any comments. Who can see the comments?
I can see comments.
Ah, right. Who have you got in the house?
We have Madame Jennifer, vegan songstress, is in the house. We got Bernie V. Hi all. And we've got Carolyn Harris. Hello.
Hi everyone.
And
so far,
so say hello. Say hello if you're here.
People will start joining, I'm sure. So we have another guest panelist, as you can see. So welcome to Benny, and Benny is the author of this book. So you were telling us it was about a year ago that you started planning this book then, Benny, yeah?
That's right, yeah. I just went on Facebook today and I saw a Facebook memory, and it was me planning the book about a year ago, saying that I was going to analyse some anti-vegan arguments, and that there were going to be sections on the environment, on health, and then also on typical FAQ kind of questions we get. And that was about a year ago.
When I saw the book, the first thing I wanted to ask you is why this type?
Yeah, I want to ask that as well. Yeah, why
And me.
Arguing with
it's a bit of clickbait, really.
Yeah, I did
it's a
wonder.
double meaning.
Yeah.
You could argue with vegans, as in arguing alongside them,
along
or
with,
if you want to argue against them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way the book is structured is
it must
going
be the
from
way,
kind of
it must be
totally
the way that
disagreeing
you
or
think.
not wanting to talk about this.
It must be the way you think, I think, Benny, because there was a bit where I thought there was a typo, something like page 5, where you talk about Ricky Gervais and about I thought you meant you said something about he posts things that everybody agrees with, and I thought you meant that they didn't disagree with. So it was, I had to read it a few times before I really got that. But there you go. Now you called the book a tool. You said you provide some tools to use against the arguments presented against veganism. So are you happy with the finished product, Benny?
Overall, I am generally happy with it. When you're writing, you think there's always more you could include, or you get to a point where you think you have to have a cut-off point, and then it's going to be, that's it for this project. Maybe save things for future dates. But overall, I think it is a framework that most arguments will fit in, and you can always include more, but maybe that's for a future book. But as it stands, I think pretty much any argument you come across will fit into the general framework.
So Benny, just to say, there's a few more joining as well. There's Ronnie Lee's here, and John T, and Vegan Pixie Warrior says hello beans, and we got Anne and Michael as well joining us. So welcome everyone. Sorry, Nella, go ahead.
Hi,
Laura.
Yeah. Hello everyone. I want to clarify something. It's not just a book about the objections. I mean, the readers won't just see a series of objections and the appropriate answers to them. There is this part, you're dealing with the objection, but what I found very interesting is that you are talking about the ways people debate and the strategies they consciously or non-consciously use during the debates, and the whole frame of the conversations that happen between vegans and non-vegans. So it's like a more complete tool than just dealing with the objections.
Yeah, I think so. I think those kind of general debate tactics could be used on any subject, really. It just happens to be veganism this time. So things like a gish gallop or anything like that, where you're trying to overwhelm the opponents, or where you're sniping from a kind of hidden position, revealing your own position. And it's very hard to get someone to say what their criteria is that they're using. Those type of things can happen in climate debates or lots of other kind of social issue debates. So I think the book kind of moves from those general kind of debate points, but obviously they are applicable to the vegan discussion as well.
So one question that I asked you just before we came on, Benny, and I said it actually would be good to ask you on the show, is because you recently reread the book again to prepare for the show, and I said, is there anything now that you would change having read it again, and how have you evolved, or have you evolved in any ways, or anything that you would add in or take out or adjust?
Yeah, I think looking at it again, I can't think of specific examples, but I think language is something that's constantly evolving within the movements. I'm going to be more anti-speciesist in the way we express ourselves. So, I mean, if you look at old Facebook posts or things you've written in the past, you might catch yourself having said things that you wouldn't say now. You would, you know, maybe you'd say fishes now instead of fish, that type of thing. So if I notice anything like that, those are definitely things that I would change now.
It's interesting, the language debate. As you might know, I've been doing a bit of what I keep calling a TikTok experiment, but I think it's a TikTok flop, I think, at the moment, because I'm struggling to get to 1,000 followers, and you need to get to 1,000 before you can go live. But there's a couple of vegan posters in particular, who will call other animals it all the time. And usually when you kind of point that out politely, they kind of, oh yeah, thanks, or something like that. But these ones are actually defending it as grammatically correct, and they're not seeing the politics of it at all. So it's really interesting, the fact that, you know, in a movement, we don't kind of progress in a linear way. There's a kind of to and fro sometimes, and, you know, we get a bit of, you know, a backlash kind of thing. And I think the language thing is like that, in the sense that even the basic thing we thought, oh, surely no one in the movement would say it now, but still a lot of people do. Yeah,
it's very true.
That's the most basic one, really. I mean, it gets more refined, I suppose. The more you look into things, language is getting more refined. But I think calling animals it is probably the most basic one that probably should be addressed.
Yeah, you thought so, wouldn't you?
And also maybe about calling animals farm animals and labelling animals in that way as well.
Because I think sometimes people think it's just it's something trivial. There's more important things to think about, but actually I think sometimes it's taking care of the little things that build into bigger things, and things like language, and it's not just about being grammatically correct as well, because often people come out with that argument, don't they? It's not it's grammatically correct, and I would use it for a human baby if I didn't know their gender, etc., etc. But actually it's more than that. It's our language is political, and it's a form of resistance to the status quo and the normative paradigm of how we talk about other animals in our day-to-day lives, isn't it? So it is important. I really feel it's important anyway.
There's no doubt about that.
I think how we view animals,
You were saying that, in a sense, then you kind of analyze what you saw online, and then thought, you know, we need a book on this. Essentially, that's what you need. Now, you say that you found a kind of path that a common argument will follow, or a pattern that they would follow. So was that just by looking at the way things went on social media or in those kind of videos, and you found that people start with this type of argument, then they move to that? That's how it went. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. I think because I was in quite a few debate groups, what would happen is you'd have maybe kind of FAQ questions, you'd have the desert island questions, and lions, eat other animals, those type of things would come up. But then people would switch to plants and that type of thing. It was just a natural progression the way things went. And then people might say at the end of it all, well, I don't care anyway, you know. So it was all from analysing the way the arguments tend to go really on from online discussions.
I was just something Vegan Pix Warrior said as well. I feel like the Socratic method is the best way, but I like debates too. And I just wonder, Benny, what's been your experience of actual conversations? Do you think that debates actually ever help change people's minds, or do you think people just dig down and dig in and like double up and just stick to what they already believe? Do debates have value, do you think, in our advocacy?
I think it's definitely part of it. I think in terms of conversations with people, you don't really want to be debating people all the time, but it does have a place in those arguments that can be debunked need to be debunked. And if you can get people to realise that they can't really use those arguments, I think that's progress, because at least you're narrowing down kind of scope of the argument and what they think they can use. And if you can kind of guide it towards what the real relevant issues are. So if someone realises, oh, well, they've debunked that argument about soy or lions isn't actually a good argument for basing our morality on the actions of other animals, then they realise they can't use those arguments again. You think with at least that person aren't going to use them again, although it's even true sometimes.
Yeah, you say that people often start with thought-terminating cliches, right, as you put it, and that's an idea that goes back to the 1950s, isn't it? And so that's kind of how people really kind of start with it, because they kind of try to stop it before it starts. That's the first bit that you identified, right?
Yeah, it's when people don't actually really want to address the issue or talk about animals. So thought terminating is just to put a stop to thinking about it at all. So live and let live is a really good example of that. Each to their own. Why can't we all get along? It's just wanting to put a stop to the debate before it can even get started, really.
Oh, this is an interesting observation.
I think a lot of arguments. Sorry, I was going to say a lot of arguments are just about silence. We've got a bit of delay,
people. Yeah, so sorry about that. You carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say a lot of arguments are actually just about silencing us altogether. So, alongside the thought terminating cliches, are just really just telling vegans to be quiet, basically, and not to advocate at all.
You'll like this question, Benny. What do you think is the best arguments non-vegans have, even though it's ultimately
Well, I'll talk a bit about what I called reflexive arguments. So the only possible way that you could come up with a good argument, say the best argument, would be where you've already adopted most of the vegan premises. So you're accepting that animals are sentient, you're accepting that maybe even animals have rights. And even with the harvest step arguments, that started with Stephen Davis, and in his paper, he accepts Tom Reagan's position, basically, that animals have rights, but he tries to turn it around.
Yeah.
So it just shows the strength of the vegan argument, really, that to try and argue against it successfully, you have to adopt quite a lot of it, but then just at, say, the last little section where you disagree, you're turning it back round reflexively and then trying to come to a slightly different conclusion. And in the case of a lot of the harvest step arguments,
do you think Davis was just trying to be clever there, though, Benny? Do you think, because he basically says, didn't he, that I agree with Tom Reagan, other animals have rights, and that Reagan has said, well, what about the other animals killed in harvest deaths, as you say, crop deaths, and then he said it still means you would go vegan, but then he kind of asked that question, but is that true, right? And so he's basically kind of going, I care as well, but you lot have missed a piece out of the equation. That's what he was really saying, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I think it is a kind of gotcha, really. It's like, well, if you are vegan, then really, sometimes people say, vegans, if they really cared, should be eating insects or should be eating oysters. I think these are kind of reflexive ones as well, because it's accepting most of, say, if you call it a plant-based diet, it'd be, say, like 98% plant-based. But to have that extra effect on the environment, or less of an effect on the environment, you should be eating oysters instead of this, or even honey instead of, the damage from sugar harvesting. Say, they would say, well, honey is better. So it's that little reflexive bit at the end, and I think it is just a gotcha, because in chapter on reflexive arguments, I've split it into 3 ways to look at it. So the first way is kind of the Davis way. I interpret it charitably, saying, okay, he's not doing it as a gotcha. He actually means it. And so he should be, say, 99% plant-based himself, but following that slightly reflexive bit himself. So in his case, it was eating 1 large mammal, a cow, per year, rather than eating some harvested crops, which he would say cause more death. Now, whether that's what he actually sticks to himself, I don't know. But, I was willing to be charitable to say he does. But I've never come across anyone that actually follows that themselves. So the next part is really where it is used as a gotcha. People aren't doing that at all. They're still eating fishes with the largest bycatch, which, if you're talking about harvest deaths, is going to make your numbers astronomical. So compared to veganism, any other diet is much bigger in terms of harvest deaths. So that's the real disingenuous way of using the arguments. And then finally, as I said, there's the vegan way of using it, where you've looked at it, but you don't really think it's a strong enough case to justify the exploitation and slaughter of animals.
There's a question for you, Benny. Why do you sound like David Attenborough?
I didn't realise I did.
The one argument from the non-vegan side that I find mostly honest, and I think it's the strongest one, is the I don't care argument. I mean, those people that accept that non-being vegan is morally wrong, that whatever a vegan says is right, but they just don't care because they have to live this life and they are gonna party and have a good time no matter who gets hurt. I think, in my opinion, this is the strongest argument. I mean, because how can you refute that? Even if you say them that they're actually immoral, they don't disagree. They're okay with that.
You do hear a lot of that as well. I hear that as well a lot. Sorry, Benny. Time delay. It's really good because Benny can talk without moving his lips as well. It's really clever.
I've got it's like a puppet.
Where's that hand?
Yeah. I suppose the answer to that, Nella, would be you've got to move on from those kind of people, because
obviously
it's kind of like unarguable, really. One thing you say early on, Benny, is that there are personal choice vegans, and I wanted to know, first of all, that's the people who say, well, it's up to you and this is up to me, but I don't know any of those, I don't think. So do you think there's a lot of those?
I think there's more of them on Twitter. There's definitely, they're kind of they're looking for kind of clout from the non-vegans or even the anti-vegans. Really, a lot of people call them pick-me vegans as well now. So it's coming from oh, I'm on your team, really, pick me. It's looking for the approval. I find vegetarians are like that a lot. I mean, vegetarians tend to think they're in the middle of the debate between what they would call meat eaters and vegans. So they'll pop up if there's a vegan arguing with a non-vegan. they'll say, "Oh, I'm vegetarian," and they think it's kind of a middle ground, and that they're kind of the umpire between. But obviously, from our perspective, they're not in the middle, really. They're just part of the other group of non-vegans that still support speciesism and still support animal exploitation. But vegetarians tend not to see themselves like that. They think they're at a kind of halfway point. So that's kind of a fallacy as well of middle ground, where you think adopting the middle position is always going to be the best. I think that's part of it as well. People naturally think a position in the middle must be more reasonable. So a position that's like veganism, which they think is extreme, can't be true, or the best position. But in fact, a lot of extreme positions, extreme in scare quotes, are actually the best positions. As Tom Reagan would say, we don't believe in harming children at all or anything like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That's one thing where we could say, and I think, Wendy, you'll agree with this, that there has been a genuine kind of cultural shift within the movement, because it was very common at first to say to people, go vegetarian first, right? Now, nobody says that anymore. But also, we used to say, in fact, we had to stop somebody saying this at the VIP a couple of years ago, because a lot of times we get vegetarians coming up and they've been looking for validation. Oh, I'm a vegetarian. They want you to say, oh, great, right? And so I made a joke out of it, and I used to say, oh, don't worry, we've got a cure for that, right? And so that's how I would start that. But they're looking for validation, and this other person used to say, oh, well, just one more step and you'll be there, kind of thing. And of course, now modern day vegans tend to see vegetarians as a long way away from vegans instead of just close to it. That's been a shift, I think, in recent years.
Yeah, I think so. If your egg consumption is really high, you could actually be causing a lot more animal death than even some meat eaters that say only ate meat occasionally. If you're eating eggs every day, your animal death count is going to be a lot higher than maybe even some meat eaters.
Not the death count as well. I mean, if your criteria is suffering, which for a lot of vegans it is, then a dairy light. Ooh.
But that's technically challenging.
This could be the first time ever we've lost a guest.
We've lost the guest.
Yes.
Come back, Benny.
Say, but I don't know whether I should now. So we feel like those those vultures in the Jungle Book, kind of like. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do?
What do you want to do? So Bernie V's replied to Nella, though. We might as well pick up on that while Bernie comes back, hopefully. I would say that they have a duty to society for them to go vegan, because it is the collective responsibility of every one of us to save ourselves. Yeah, and I wonder if they are actually, when they say they don't care, because I've had this conversation with a neighbour recently, and he was very openly saying, I agree. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree. It's awful. What we do to animals is just terrible. It's awful. And then he was like, but couldn't give up my meat. No, couldn't do it. That's just the way it is. And it's just like, I can't understand. But he was like literally drawing his line in the sand, saying there's no way I'm ever going to even consider going vegan. But I totally agree. You're morally right. But I wonder if that is part of the cognitive dissonance as well, in that saying they don't care. Do they really not care, or is that part of the plan? So just Benny, we were worried that we were going to lose the guest then. Welcome back. Benny, I was just asking the question, and I wonder if you've got an opinion on this, whether, because Nella brought up earlier about people saying they don't care, or people just saying that they agree with you, but there's no way they're ever going to consider veganism. Do you think that saying they don't care is part of the cognitive strategies, in order that they don't have to face the fact that probably they might care, but they don't want to have to care, because that again brings them into that realm of having to face their own behaviors and whether that aligns with what they really believe? Do you think it's just a facade? Do you think?
I think it's hard to. I think it is a coping mechanism, really. Yeah. I think there's very few people that really genuinely don't care. about an animal suffering. And I think they do realise that, obviously a pig can suffer and pigs are sentient. And I think with pigs, we get a lot of some of the cruelest kind of languages aimed at pigs, because I think it's more of a masking thing of, it's like almost overcompensating, in a way. I've lost my train of thought there, really. But
I agree with that. There is a concept. I think. I forgot who did. I mean, I know Bauman talked about it. Is a sociologist, Anna Herentz. She talked about this concept called animal pity, and so she said the start of morality was looking in the eyes of a stranger. And if you see suffering, you feel empathetic. And Tom Reagan said that once in a film clip. He said that the other arm was almost like saying, if you knew me, you wouldn't do this to me. But of course, nobody knows the livestock because they're units of production. They know individuals as pets and that kind of stuff, or even to some extent the individuals down at the zoo even. But they don't know the individuals on the shelf in the supermarket. And they never looked in their eyes because they don't have any eyes left by the time they meet them.
Yeah, and so that's avoided. They don't want to look in those eyes. And that's part of the distancing as well with the language, like we were saying, and making animals a collective rather than individuals. So it's stripping the individuality and stripping the sentience, really, in a way as well. And that's part of the, I think, I'm not sure if it was covered in the meat paradox section, or the denial of mind to animals that are used as livestock or used for meat. The experimenters found that once people found out they were going to be using animals, they downgraded their level of sentience for those animals.
Yeah, I suppose that's close to Christoph's work, isn't it, Nella? What is it, the right-wing personality type thing that yeah, awesome. Before
another thing that I wanted to mention before we go on, I don't know if you covered it when I was out. It is this, because I see that happening more frequently. People idolizing vegans but not going vegan, and you mentioned it extensively in the book. And I think it's the opposite of those who would be aggressive towards vegan. That used to happen a lot in the past. Now you have those that they actually admire vegans, but they put veganism on a pedestal and just put it out there out of reach, so you don't have to bother. Is it really happening more often lately? Or is it a personal impression that I have from my own experience with people?
Yeah, I realised that myself when you find yourself being flattered. I mean, I've been called a monk and like really ascetic, and you're being praised, but then you kind of realise, oh, this is a form of distancing as well. They're like putting you on the pedestal and saying they could never do it. Oh, I could never be vegan. So, but it's kind of, you have to be careful because that flattery is used to distance themselves from saying they would have to go vegan because they're putting it out of reach, basically. They're saying it's too difficult. You're some sort of saint to be able to do it. Whereas really we want to try and normalise it and say, oh, I'm just an ordinary person. I work 9 to 5. I've got a family, whatever, same as you. And I managed to be vegan. It's not something ascetic or extraordinary. It's just something that's part of my everyday life now.
Do you think sometimes vegans maybe have a part to play in that, in how we maybe represent veganism or how we advocate for it or how we sometimes, you know, like it's sometimes presented as the magic bullet for everything, like health and environment and this and that, and we, you know, we play into how beneficial being vegan is, but does that perhaps in a way play against us then, in that it's seen as this perfect thing and people just feel like they can't live up to that in some way? Do you think we ought to, you know, bear that in mind when we're advocating?
Seen as heroic, or, you know, you're a savior for going vegan, whereas really it's just a basic step you can take yourself, and it's a position that you adopt. I think a lot of the arguments might overreach a little bit, especially in health, I find. I mean, at the stage we're at in vegan, healthy all the time.
Lost your sound for a moment there, Benny. No, you're back. You're back,
right,
but you
okay.
just your sound froze for a moment.
I wanted to go back, and I think it's relevant to what's just been said in a way, because I think when they were talking about, if I can find it, it's a bit moving around, I think they were still talking about these pick-me vegans, and Vegan Pixie Warrior said they think being vegan is enough, and I'd be interested to know your opinion on this vegan is enough or not situation, because I think I might be a bit out of step with most people on this, because I think veganism is a grand, you know, glorious idea, whereas most people seem to reduce it a little bit. You know, I tend to have the vision of veganism that the pioneers had, which was, it was a cure-all in a way for them, but I don't know whether modern day vegans would see it that way anymore.
I think sometimes it's been narrowed down a bit, like you talk yourself about the focus and the scope. So almost in a way, to want to argue against veganism, if it's narrowed down to just a consumer activity or even a consumer boycott, then I can see in that way that it's not going to be enough just as a consumer activity. But then in a way, that's a straw man as well. If we look at the full scope of it, we're not really saying that's all it is. I think that's just a way of narrowing it down in order to argue against it. But if you do that, you've still got to replace all those other areas with the things that I think veganism covers anyway, which is a real, you know, quite a profound change in our relationship to animals and the way we view the world, and how we're against exploitation. And I think that kind of shift in mindset is part of the larger scope. But I think if you just treat it as just a consumer activity, then that's where a lot of the kind of anti-capitalist arguments are coming from. I can understand them, but I think they just narrowed it down in order to be able to argue against veganism with no real intention of being vegan, really.
There is a...
See, this is a songstress. The songstress trying to get you to name names. She's been a bit naughty there, I think.
There is a comment by Ronnie.
Oh,
it's at 6:24 if you can find it, Roger.
Okay. Ooh, it's way back. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. This one.
The thing is, it's very relevant because if people see veganism as a religion or personal salvation, then it's normal for them to think it is enough and do nothing else about other animal suppression. I mean, I think there is this point of everyone's journey towards veganism or within veganism that they need to connect the dots and actually realize that they are part of a social and political movement.
That's why I suppose the argument comes in.
Yeah.
I'm sure Jeremy would say that when we're making the movement too human-centric, and that would tie in with this, wouldn't it? That people feel that being vegan is about them, about their health or their kind of lifestyle, or it's a trend, or whatever it might be. I suppose that's very much that human-centric view, isn't it? But I wonder, is that actually veganism? For me, I don't feel that it is. Sorry, Benny.
That's Instagram. That's Instagram veganism, really. That's being on the beach, and what I want to see more in the vegan movement is more. There's a guy on Instagram called Vegan Trucker. I want to see more vegan truckers. More people that are just working ordinary jobs rather than seeing people on beaches on Instagram and that type of thing. Make
we'll
it more
try and experiment
relatable.
then in what you just said, Benny. We'll go, Grumpy Vegan Grandad, are you there? Grumpy Vegan
No, I was
Grandad,
just thinking of Grumpy Vegan Grandad.
So,
In his truck.
nobody will know what I'm talking about, will they?
I know what you're talking about. Beetlejuice. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean.
Normalizing.
Sorry, this flipping time delay is a nightmare, isn't it? Sorry, Benny.
I think it's about normalizing veganism. So that part about distancing again, if it's only like a lifestyle aspiration, these lifestyles seem, beyond what we can afford or do, especially if we're working full time as well. So that's why I want to see more kind of ordinary, let's say, vegans that are highlighted really, or if you're going to show recipes and stuff, make it more relatable for people on certain budgets, that type of thing.
We put together a PowerPoint, Benny, and so we thought we'd go through that because that'll take us also through the book. One thing I wanted to ask though before we did that is you talk about people seeking comfort in the status quo, and for me as a sociologist, that status quo, that cultural kind of construction is very distorted, based on things like children's books and stuff. And yet we've had the kind of veganism on the street now showing the truth and this kind of stuff for several years. So do you think we're denting the kind of the kind of glossy, kind of free range, kind of happy animal type farm type thing, the kind of standard thing that we all used to grow up with in our minds? I always say this is the farm that people know or want to know, kind of thing. Do you think we're denting that at all by showing them the truth, as it were? Do you think we're getting somewhere in that sense?
I think even a lot of the reporting that's happening, even from kind of not vegan, especially shows. There's a lot of stuff on TV now that are showing the reality. I'd love to see it on Panorama or something. I think there's going to be something on horse racing possibly soon. But I know my family have said, yeah. I know some members of my family have said, I don't. There's this Adam Henson was on TV, and he's going around these farms, and it's all bucolic and everything, but they're not falling for it. I don't think it's just an effect of my book. Them having read it or anything. I think they're just seeing through it now, really. It's a lot of propaganda. So I think we are having an effect in that way.
Yeah. What about Wendy and Ella? Would you agree with that? Do you think we're starting to kind of, the vegan reality, or whatever you want to call it, is starting to shape people's opinion of the things that the children's book used to do, kind of thing?
It's hard. It's so hard when you're kind of surrounded by people who are vegan, and then when you kind of think, oh yes, it is, we're getting somewhere, things are changing, and then when you go back to a circle of people who are not vegan, not in your world, don't have those conversations, and you might mention something and it just goes completely over their head, and you think, oh okay, it's not as common or as normal as I believe it to be, because
I'd like it to be, yeah.
And I would like it to be. So, but then it's hard to say because it depends who you're mixing with. It depends what direction you're coming from with that question. I suppose. I'm suppose it must be having an effect somewhere, but maybe it's still too early to tell exactly what that is.
I agree with that.
There's a thing called.
I feel that there is something going on, that something is changing. I have this sense, and but then there are days when we're doing outreach, for example, and people are asking about veganism or looking at the screens, and you realize that they really never thought about this. Not even with all these products reading vegan on their packages or the advertisements in TV, they've never thought about this. They've never thought about other animals. So I'm not sure that much can change.
I think they relate it to the human as well, don't they? That because of all the products and veganism is becoming more normalized, but people just see it as a choice. Yeah. Going right back to where you started the book, actually, Benny, it's people will just go, oh, yeah, there's a lot more vegans. They're choosing this lifestyle and they're choosing these products. Good for them, but they still distance from it. And it's about the human. They don't relate it to the reasons why people are vegan and relating it back to, animal liberation and being a political social movement. There's a lack of understanding of that, I believe.
Yeah, you see so much about non-vegans kind of telling us what veganism is. I have this a lot on Twitter with we will say veganism isn't a diet, and then we get told they'll pull up the dictionary, the wrong definition, saying that veganism is a diet, but using it like an adjective rather than a noun and that type of thing. So, but even if that was true, I think we just have to say, well, this is what I mean by veganism, no matter what that says, and then we have the discussion from there, from how we are defining it.
The good old definitions. Did you analyze anything in terms of class in the book, Benny? I can't remember that bit, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I didn't do any class analysis. Maybe that'll be for the future. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. Yeah, more working class, unemployed, or council estate vegan representation. I'm from a council estate myself, so that's great. Yeah, cheap recipe made easy to find. Veganism needs to be more accessible to the working classes, because that's a big misconception as well, that it's a middle class or it's a posh thing, whereas I think most of the vegans I know are working class.
Yeah. Well, working class scumbag like Ronnie Lee.
That's nice, Ronnie, isn't it? It's nice. Give me your old cellmate.
I know, yeah. Well, you can't answer me back, so it's really useful to be able to do this to him. There's a couple of phrases that I thought would be interesting for you to define, because I was looking for them elsewhere, but I couldn't find them. So slothful induction and sunk cost fallacy, which I've never heard of that second one. So can you explain those two?
Okay, yeah. So slothful induction is inductions putting various pieces of arguments together to come to a conclusion. It's kind of it's not the opposite to deduction, but it's a different thing to deduction. So it's when you have different pieces of evidence, bringing them together and then coming to a conclusion. So the slothful part of it is when there's enough evidence that you should be coming to a conclusion, but you aren't. So I related this to a lot of the kind of public intellectuals I come across, like deGrasse Tyson, Attenborough, Brian Cox, Sam Harris, who I didn't mention in the book. I just realised today, actually, I probably should have included him, because he mentions veganism and kind of pay lip service to it and say, oh, it's a good idea, but at the moment I can't be vegan, or it's a good idea for the future at some unspecified future points when either they will be vegan or society will be vegan. Richard Dawkins is like that as well. He kind of pays lip service to it, saying, yeah, Chomsky, they'll say it's a good idea in theory, if only we could have this, kind of, if only there was an alternative to animal exploitation that we could take advantage of. Maybe there will be this in the future. So they're being slothful by not putting all those pieces together, all the evidence for animal sentience, all the evidence
Wendy wants to ask
for
if
the
it's
environment.
a speciesist term, didn't you?
I think it's quite speciesist.
Oh,
What do you think,
slothful,
Benny?
maybe, yeah.
Slothful, yeah, because it's using it derogatively, isn't it? In a derogatory way.
It is. Yeah.
Shame on you, Malone. Shame on you.
That's the part for the 10th anniversary edition. I'll change that. Yeah.
10th anniversary, yeah. What will you call it now instead of slothful?
I'll put the new term, yeah. Lazy. Could that be all right, or is that lazy induction or something?
Earlier. So I have to confess I don't know the second name or the fourth name. So are you familiar with all of those, Benny?
Yeah, I've been arguing with Martin Cohen on Twitter recently. He's a philosopher. I discovered his book as well. While I was looking at some critical thinking books, I picked up his critical thinking for dummies one, which I just had a little skip through. I might give it to charity now because his arguments weren't very good at all. He seems to be going along with a lot of what Blytheman was saying. She's anti-vegan. I think she writes for the Scottish Daily Record. And she's part of this kind of regenerative agriculture movement in the UK. Piers Morgan, we all know him, yeah. I think he just does it for engagement, really. It's a bit of quite dramatic, isn't he, really? DeGrasse Tyson.
That's one word for him, anyway. That's the polite word. It's not my word for him, but there you go. We're just before the watershed, so I'll be nice.
Right. I'm going to load this up, I think, and see whether we can make some progress on it. We've actually, the time has flown past. Actually, we're almost like 12 minutes till the end.
We haven't even started Benny's thing yet.
So Benny, when the slides come up, you can maybe describe them, tell them, how it fits into the book, and guide us through the book through the slides, perhaps. So that would be quite good. And I think they're in the right order. Yeah, so this was the beginning. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I put this in chapter 2. I think this is the only diagram. Maybe that's something else I would like if I'd have had a bigger budget for the book and any help with publishing or anything. I would definitely try and get more diagrams in, like we're going to show, I think. But I wasn't sure about copyright as well. But this is a public domain one, so I included this. So this is Graham's hierarchy. A guy called Paul Graham did an essay called "How to Disagree," because he was looking at internet discussions and trying to come up with a way that we could disagree better. So if we are going to have discussions, what are the best ways to disagree? So starting from the bottom is the worst ways to disagree. So it's a hierarchy, and that's just name calling. Then ad hominem is a fallacy. You're not addressing the arguments, you're just addressing the person. Responding to tone doesn't address the arguments either. You're just addressing the way a person has said it. As vegans, we'll come across that a lot. People will say we're being too aggressive, too forthright. And even now, people don't like you being too kind of sassy, or they don't like any banter really either. So that's just responding to tone. Contradiction, you're just stating that the other position is wrong, but you're not offering any evidence. And then we're starting to get into the better kind of arguments now. And the way I structured the book almost tries to follow this, with kind of the 4 terminating cliches that be at the bottom, where you're not engaging with the arguments at all, and almost responding to tone. You're saying veganism or vegans are too extreme and not wanting to engage with them. So we find that these earlier chapters are things that don't really address what we as vegans want to be addressed, which is animal exploitation and, say, the commodification of animals. They're our main points. But as we get to refutation, that's a better argument. You're now looking at what the person's argument is, and you're trying to offer arguments against it that do kind of stick and do have validity. And then the best form of argument out of the lot would be refuting the central point. So in terms of veganism, I don't think anything can touch veganism in terms of refuting the central points about animals being sentient and that they're commodified. These are type of the undeniable things about veganism. And certainly the environmental arguments as well, ecological efficiency, those type of things. The real strength of the vegan arguments, a lot of them are in this central point, really. And then the kind of stuff that we can ignore if we choose, or that people want to kind of drag us down to these other levels, are the things like name calling and the ad hominems, which we shouldn't really get involved in. We should try and rise above and try and refocus it on the animals, really.
Yeah, reading that list, it makes you think that human beings are a bit sneaky when it comes to putting together arguments, wouldn't you, Benny?
Yeah, it's almost like they don't want to address the central points.
Imagine our surprise.
Yeah.
Now,
Is this
this
the 4% one? Is this the 4% one, this one?
This is about the biomass of animals on Earth. So it only really takes into account mammals, but it is quite shocking in the way it shows.
Yeah.
It's the human population, and then the vast majority are animals that are being bred to be slaughtered. So I find this a useful graphic for when people talk about biodiversity, because the biodiversity they're talking about is that small percentage of free living animals that aren't directly exploited.
Just up there.
Yeah, I would say
4% bit, which is always a shocking figure, isn't it? 4%.
Yeah. So if we say they're like the free living animals and the biomass of the rest of life on Earth, in terms of mammals, is those that are, the cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and other animals that are exploited. And all of these animals are bred. I liken it to canned hunting, but most people think of canned hunting as with lions and those type of what they would call big game animals in Africa. So they're bred to be hunted, but really my comparison is that these animals are being bred to be hunted as well. It's just that the hunt has been narrowed down to this canned hunting situation. And the other reason I try and do that as well is because it's trying to get people that already disagree with canned hunting to maybe see that this is canned hunting as well. So the animals have no chance to escape. They're just bred. They will never know freedom. This is their only existence. And then they're kind of trapped in that system and then slaughtered. And we can see the origin of it as well in human history. When, say, humans were hunter-gatherers, they've obviously realized at some point animals were gathering in certain spots, and then humans started interfering in the natural process of animal breeding and would start selecting the animals for certain traits to make them more susceptible to domestication, really.
Yeah.
And domestication's another word that can be problematic as well. So it's just trying to make people think by calling it canned hunting. It is trying to be a bit of agitation to kind of shock them out of thinking, well, they're just domestic animals. Well, actually, they're part of canned hunting, really.
I've never heard that term actually before. So John T's just clarifying, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't even counting exploited birds. No, it's just mammals actually.
All fishes.
So
it would
or fishes, yeah.
If fishes and birds are in there, I mean,
Yeah.
the actual mammals themselves would be fairly small, then I would think. Tell you one thing that interests me is that, you know, there's what, 2% horses and there's 3% goats. So there's more buffaloes killed than those, which is quite interesting. And then right down there, you've got 1% pets. So what's that reference? Do you know, Benny?
It's so that would be cats and dogs. It's still domesticated animals. It's still part of the animals that are bred portion of it. Yeah.
All right.
And it's funny because, and I think you go into this in the book as well. People often say, "Well, if we don't breed them, they won't be here. Then they won't even have a life." And there's even something that you passed on to us, an article. I don't. We probably haven't got time to get into it, but talking about our obligation to consume other animals, because otherwise,
moral duty, no less.
Moral duty. Because if their reason for being alive is that to be consumed, then without consuming them, they have no reason to be alive. So therefore, we're doing them a favor, and it's our duty to let them have this life, even if it's short.
Yeah. The philosopher, Henry Salt, and a bit of an early pioneer there for you, Roger. He called it the logic of the larder. So it's kind of a bit of a retroactive argument. I don't find it to be genuine at all. I think people are starting with the conclusion they want, which is wanting to eat animals and to have animal products, and then working backwards.
Work away from where you want to end up, kind of thing.
Yeah. So then,
it's interesting you mentioned salt, because when we thought this was going to come up in the moral duty to eat meat, Salt said, and I think it might have been in the autobiography, perhaps 70 Years Amongst Savages, it said, you know, you can imagine herds of homeless cows going around asking people to be kind enough to eat them. He said something like that, but I couldn't find that. I couldn't find that quote, so I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find it. So,
wow, I've not heard of that now.
Yeah, it might not have been Salt. It could have been somebody else, but you know, John Wynne Tyson or something. But I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, because it would seem to go a little bit against the idea of animals not existing at all if we didn't eat them. But I think you've just got to think about it. Well, if we didn't breed them to be slaughtered, it's the actual age that animals are slaughtered at as well comes into it. With chick maceration, anyway, you have a day of life. So is that being generous to chicks? And then 6-month-old pigs, is that really being generous and giving life to animals?
No, not to mention all the mutilations on the way.
Yeah.
Benny, do you think this is one of the arguments where if you immediately flipped it onto, well, if that was a group of humans, it would become appalling then, wouldn't it, that argument?
Yeah, I think people, I did think about that. I thought, will people try and use this in a human context? Will they try and say, well, you know, you're against people having babies or whatever, but to try and to show that it's not a speciesist argument, you know, they're saying, oh, you don't want these animals to exist. Well, if it was humans, I wouldn't want humans to be in some sort of matrix either, where they're just being bred, kept alive for a certain period and then slaughtered.
And also, you've got to remember the parents of these other animals that are being bred as well. I mean, they're being forced. They're not consenting. They're not, you know, we're forcing this onto them. It's exploitation of them reproductively and sexually, isn't it? That they don't have a choice. They're not consenting. So it's not like consenting humans having children, and you know, it's complete exploitation.
Yeah, I think if you put it in the human context, you'd see that it's not the with the consent of, it wouldn't be with the consent of the human parents, and it would be totally abhorrent. Yeah.
So what should we say about this one then, Benny?
So this slide, global land use for agriculture across different diets. So I would use this one. It might come up in any kind of argument you could use against veganism in terms of land use. Really, this would be useful for. So even if you're saying it's about exploited workers on land. If it's about crop deaths, I think it's useful just by showing the sheer ecological efficiency of veganism. And we can see vegan is at the bottom, using the least amount of land. And all these different models, there's 5 models there. We've got to look at them as feeding the same population. So if your problem is with land use, this is another argument that backfires, saying that you should be vegan. And I talk about that in the book as well, about arguments backfiring. So plants, though, will backfire. Anything about ecological efficiency backfires.
Water.
Yeah, any water use, any uses of resources basically backfire because of this ecological efficiency and because of trophic levels and feed conversion ratios. With plants, you know, you're feeding plants to animals to then be eaten. So it's almost like the second law of thermodynamics. They're looking for like this kind of perpetual motion machine that can't exist. So
this is an interesting one. This reduced the amount of land we use for agriculture by 75%. So, I mean, in terms of rewilding and you know, the rebirth of free living beings. I mean, you know, they always say, well, you're going to have to eventually defend your food from free living beings, which is true. But I mean, just think of the amount of space we'd be giving them, you know, before we ended up back in conflict with them, really, in a way.
Yeah, I think E.O. Wilson was calling for 50% of the earth to be given back to wildlife, basically, back to nature. Anyone interested in rewilding should be really looking into veganism as the best way to do it. I think there's going to be that other slide there of Britain as well. And Northern Ireland.
Oh, this might be the next one.
Yeah. So if we look at the possibility for rewilding for Britain,
so Jennifer,
this
if
works
you
out
understand the chat, me and you, we're in the sea here. Look, we're floating. In the sea.
Floating.
Yeah, Benny's taking all the land away from us.
Colonialist. Just kidding, Benny. It's really hard to read that. I don't know if people who are watching can read that, because it's quite small, isn't it?
Yeah, and the figures on the right there in those hexagons are the kind of outsourced land use as well. So Britain could actually feed itself if everyone was vegan, using a lot less land. So I suppose you could make kind of a patriotic argument for feeding ourselves.
So this is just bunching everything together to so you can understand the size of it, right? So it's yeah. For example, this bit is beef and lamb pastures, the greeny bit. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got beef feed, which is that hexagon within the hexagon.
Mm-hmm.
Then the blue one is pig feed. Then we've got fruit, vegetables, and cereals. Then we've got poultry feed, nice specious term. Dairy pastures is this one here, if you can see it, and dairy feed. Interesting, isn't it? That language, feed. You know, food, feed. It's always an interesting one, isn't it?
That side, those. I was going to say hexagons, but they're not hexagons, are they? Are they No, they are hexagons. Are they hexagons? Anyway, those shapes. Yeah. That side, that's I can't read it properly, but that's the food that's grown outside of the UK and Northern Ireland for people living there. But the stuff on the left within that's actually the land that's used in the UK and Northern Ireland. So that's 2 different charts, isn't it? Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So on the right, the hexagons, a lot of that might be the Amazon rainforest, or it could be in Indonesia, it could be rainforest there. But you know, a lot of the chicken feed that they're calling, a lot of that will be soy in the rainforest. And another slide that we'll come on to will show the different proportions of soy that are used as feed. The dairy feed one's interesting because a lot of that will be for over the winter. You know, a lot of the farmers will try and say with the harvest death arguments, that they're not harvesting, but they're still harvesting, going towards harvesting hay for feed and things like that, which I don't think get calculated in. I think they've generally tried to put these things where they grow the most. Obviously, it doesn't map entirely. So for the highland areas, it'd be output pasture really, and then for the southeast, it's a lot of grain is grown there. So they have tried to put that there really for Kent and those areas. One thing when I was visiting Anglesey, I read about, I think in Roman times, I think Anglesey pretty much grew the entire grain for the whole country, especially for Wales then, you know.
Yeah, it was called Mam Cymru, the mother of Wales, because the Romans, they got stuck. They wanted to cross the Menai Straits into Anglesey, and they got stuck, and they went to all the trouble of they trained I don't know what they call it, a contingent of soldiers who could swim with horses, and they just about trained them to get across when there was a kind of insurrection somewhere in England and they had to go back. So, wow. You know, all the kind of peasants and pagans and that in Anglesey are all giving the finger and everything, you know, fuck off and all that kind of stuff. And the Romans never got there. So that was really interesting. Yeah. There's no straight roads in Anglesey, folks.
I think people see these fields of grain, and it's that kind of intuition, really, that veganism would use more land. I think just because people see vast fields of grain being grown, but they don't realise it's going towards animal feed. They think it's feeding humans. Now, of course, some of it does go to feed humans, but I think in Scotland, I don't know if I can't actually see there. What would, you know, oats would be interesting, because my go-to now for any complaints about almonds or anything like that is oats.
You know, and especially golf courses, Benny. Golf courses.
Oh yeah, golf needs to go as well.
Yeah. So the Orkney Islands have been turned into a golf course here.
Yeah. I think Trump tried that, didn't he?
I probably did. Yeah, probably did.
Now this one, this is quite a recent report about air pollution that was quite shocking. So it's deaths from air pollution in the United States. And this was quite a late inclusion to the book because I think the report came out just before I published it. So I wanted to include it as a link just to show the kind of human cost as well to animal agriculture or animal agribusiness, which I probably would start calling it. And that might be another term I'd change. Because I think Lee Hall, I saw her say, to call it animal agribusiness, which I thought was better than agriculture in a way. Because we're kind of getting away from the idea of agriculture and reserving agriculture just for plants rather than animals.
Yeah, interesting character, Lee Hall. She's kind of disappeared, really, in terms of. I bet most modern day vegans never heard of Lee Hall.
She republished on their own terms.
Oh, right. Okay. She was a student of Francione, I believe. So, what does it mean, fine particle pollution?
So, when you can smell that manure in the air, it's horrible, or ammonia might get caught up. Basically, when they're spraying the fields, and even when they're just trying to get rid of the sheer amount of the waste that kind of ends up in lagoons in these pig farms. Now, this is the United States, so we also know about the kind of environmental racism that happens there as well, where they will place these farms close to, say, black communities, that type of thing. So it has more of a negative effect on people there and on poorer communities as well.
Well, the reason I'm interested in that phrase is because last week Jennifer and I took part in the rescue of 200 hens from a farm, and we were there when they were taking the hens out, and we would then transfer them into our vans and this kind of stuff. And that evening, there was a kind of brown kind of discharge out of my eyes, and when I blew my nose, it was just black, you know. And Declan from the Back into Daylight Sanctuary, he said, well, that'll be all the stuff floating in the air, you know, because the place stunk of ammonia, as you'd expect. But there was obviously these fine particles which was getting in my eyes, you know. So it was quite interesting. That's why I kind of thought of that when I saw that phrase.
Yeah. So if people come up with, again, the arguments about the damages of plant agriculture, it's a massive portion of that pink area is the animal feed again. So it kind of backfires once again, just due to feed conversion ratios. Eating lower down on the trophic level is always going to be better because you're just using fewer resources and there's going to be less pollution and less human death as well.
Because it's the waste into the water as well, isn't it? It's not just the water, because we mentioned water earlier, the resources that are used in the, I can't think of another word, but in production of sort of flesh and other things that people consume. But it's also the waste that gets slewed away into the water systems as well. That causes massive problems for communities and people who are living close by as well.
Yeah,
there's some love for Lee Hall. Hello, Laura.
Oh, hi, Laura.
Hello, Laura.
Ex-guest panelist. So and partly she has a Patreon account. So
hey, Deb.
Yeah,
Wondered where Deb was.
So after donating to the Vegan Songstress, you could donate to that one. Getting that in. Right, we're getting a bit short on time, so I suppose we better speed up a little bit if we could, but it's nothing too drastic. We've still got 28 people hanging in there with us.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So what about this one? Carbon dioxide.
I'll have to get a bit closer to this one. Okay, how much carbon dioxide could regrowth of trees and wilderness store if we changed global diets? So basically, this would be the effects of rewilding, giving up all that land that is currently used for animal agribusiness, basically. This is a good one for, I suppose, the regenerative crowd as well, the Alan Savory kind of cultists that think, it'd be better to raise animals on pasture to sequester carbon. Studies show that rewilding would be a lot more effective. And here again, we see that a vegan diet would be the best for storing massive amounts of CO2. And we can't really afford to wait for any technological fixes to this problem either. If they would even work in the future, the best way is nature's way, basically, which is trees. And I think kelp forests are quite good as well. There are some projects trying to get these kelp forests that used to exist on the seashore, get those back. So rewilding's a massive thing, but only possible.
This is 2020, and it's ourworldindata.org. So is that one of your sources there that you go to a lot, Benny?
It is, yeah, really good source.
Ourworldindata.org. It's really right down the bottom, very small, so people probably won't see that. So this is 2020, so it's last year then. So
yeah, if people want to follow Hannah Ritchie on Twitter, she tweets a lot of these. I've used a lot of the Our World in Data ones to get the information. I don't know if she's vegan herself. I don't really know if she would actually say on Twitter, because the way people kind of view it as well is they would think she's being biased towards it. I think if she did reveal she was, but I suspect maybe she.
It's really interesting that, isn't it? Because they go, oh, but he's a vegan doctor. What they don't realize is that they went vegan because what they found out as a medical student. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think Poore is like that, and another gentleman I can't remember at the moment. It's because they did the research and then they went vegan. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we're getting to, I think there's the last two now, I think. So
okay.
Global land use.
Yeah, again, another one from Hannah Ritchie compiled this. So that's every bit of land on Earth, which obviously isn't suitable for everything. Habitable land, then 50% of it is suitable for agriculture. And then we get to the finer parts of that. How much of that is used for animal agriculture, and then how much is actually used for fruit and veg and growing grains and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's the ecological efficiency.
Benny, did you cover this argument that you hear from farmers? A lot of this on TikTok is that it's remarkable the number of farmers who only have got land that only grass will grow on and nothing else. Did you, it's really weird the fact that they don't think about nut trees or hemp or anything. The only thing they seem to be capable of growing or watch grow is grass. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a marginal land argument, I think I might have called it. So they will say, on these hills, the only thing we can have are sheep or Highland cattle, that type of thing. But if you look at, say, the map of Britain there that we had, you would be just growing the food we need where it grew best, and then obviously you would have to distribute it. But seeing as transport would be the least part of the contribution to the overall life cycle greenhouse gases of the products anyway, it wouldn't be that bad. And we transport a lot of food.
Things like vertical farming and veganic farming and polytunnels and greenhouses. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily have to do it the way it's always done. It's not just a question of we're going to put vegetables where there was once, animal feed being, I mean, we would think outside of the box. Vertical farming seems like a really interesting future for me. I know it's high tech, although a lot of it is renewables, so wind turbines and solar panels, that kind of stuff. But that seems to be an incredible way of doing it. You could actually grow your fruit and vegetables inside the city where it's going to be consumed. So that, there wouldn't be any cost in terms of transportation then. Do it with a push bike. And
also try and eliminate harvest steps that way as well.
That's right, yeah.
Originally, I did try and write a little bit about
problem. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was going to write a little bit about vertical farming in the book, but I ended up leaving it out because I wasn't too sure about it for the future. It's just something I need to research a bit more myself. So I ended up leaving that out, just looking more at rewilding and stuff. It's interesting about the nut trees as well, though. And even we don't do any terraced farming like we do in Southeast Asia. So maybe we could start terracing the hill farms, that way as well. And I think oats
that would displace a lot of free living beings in a way, though. But certainly that used to be an early vegan pioneers argument, that this argument that there are only areas where you can grow pasture is that nut trees in particular will just grow anywhere. You can find nut trees growing out of the side of a rock, mountains, that kind of stuff. So, they hardly ever need water, some of them. So the idea that you're limited in that sense is ridiculous.
And didn't Tim say that about hemp as well when Tim was on the show talking about hemp, that hemp's quite sturdy and
it's like a weed. I mean, hemp is incredible. It's like a weed.
It will grow anywhere. Yeah. And very versatile as well, isn't it?
I think a lot of the marginal land as well, even in the States, you could be growing yellow split peas, which are good for protein as well. And I know they're starting to make milk out of the yellow pea. I know that doesn't sound very great, but
is it yellow?
The yellow,
the milk.
The milk.
Is the milk yellow?
No, I did. It's really, I think it's the highest in protein. Really quite thick. Yeah. So, and this one is again from Rewilding data. Hannah Ritchie again. So I really recommend following her on Twitter. Also, Nicholas Carter. Sorry, he has a really good Twitter account debunking a lot of the regenerative agriculture arguments. He will use all this data, and he just did a presentation using a lot of slides. I think it'd be up. If people are friends with me on Facebook or whatever, I'll link a lot of these I'm talking about anyway. So this one is soy, which we hear a lot of. You know, you vegans are destroying the rainforest with soy. But we can see quite clearly here, the vast majority of it goes to animal feed, which mostly for chickens. You will have your dairy farmers saying, "Oh, we don't use it," but again, you don't really want to be going down the environmental route too much, because I think they try and get you really amongst the weeds, really, and just arguing with them about really precise things. Matthew Hayek, another environmentalist, he calls it precisionism, where they're really trying to narrow it down to the smallest things, where you'll be arguing with a dairy farmer over how much feed they use, and you're really losing the bigger picture of animal exploitation, but they're kind of trying to drag you down into those little areas. Whereas really we should be saying, well, look at the overall picture of how much is used for animal feed and how much of the rainforest is being cleared for this, you know, and they clear it, they slash and burn, intimidate indigenous people, move them out, intimidate and kill any environmental protesters, and then slash and burn, then move in with the cattle, ranching. Basically, it's basically like the Wild West again there, you know.
So presumably in a vegan world, then the blue bit is obviously going to dominate, and the industry bit will stay, but the red bit, or the ready, what do you call that, rusty kind of color, that would go, wouldn't it, in a vegan world? So.
Yeah.
I think things would change quite a lot, though, wouldn't they? Because I think whenever we would do things as they are and it's business as usual, we're just thinking about change that bit or change that bit. But actually, once things start to change, that has a ripple effect that changes everything then. And while you're holding on to the status quo and the norm, you don't make space for new things, because once you start changing, new ideas appear, don't they? New ideas, new horizons appear that you wouldn't have even known existed before until you start taking that next step. And on the next step, you see a little bit of a different horizon. So once things start, we can't even imagine what a vegan world would be like, because it would just be so different, I imagine. It's what we expect.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite inspiring thinking about the amount of wildland there could be. And if you look at that model of how much goes to animal feed, you would never design that from scratch. If you were looking at, you know, what's the most efficient way to feed humans, you would just never start with that model. You would start with the vegan model. And then if anything did have to be added in, even in terms of, oh, we absolutely have to use animal manure, you would look at other ways of doing that in kind of these agroforestry kind of settings, or some sort of setting where you're not exploiting animals. You'd be thinking in those terms if it was a vegan world. But you would just never start with this model. It's kind of the model
you wouldn't start at all. This is not an ideal type in any sense, and it's a little bit weird, isn't it? You know, because like you say to people, you know, okay, if you've got a human population and a non-human population, which one is more morally important? They always say the human one, and yet we give most of the food to the non-human ones at the expense of the human ones. So they don't even live their own values.
No, and they say we don't care about humans.
Yeah,
but they don't. When they say the human one, they don't actually mean all humans. So in their mind, probably justified to cause all this harm, so the few humans, the privileged ones, mainly in the West, can live how they want.
Yeah, and I think we get accused of, you know, it's a first world thing as well. But really, if we've got the means to be vegan, we should be, and that's leading the way and modeling it for other societies to follow. And because it will disproportionately affect poorer people that aren't having as much of an effect as we are, just by being in the West as well. I mean, they're contributing to global warming and climate change the least, but they will be affected the most. So it's our responsibility, if we can change, to be vegan and have that lowest impact we can, even though we are in the West.
Yeah.
And not will be, but they already are,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's not they will be affected. It's they already are affected massively. Yeah.
Okay, can you imagine at the time of climate collapse, which nasty bastards in the world are going to be the ones left? They're going to be all people like Trump and stuff who've got their underground bunkers and their big yachts.
Oh, they'll be in space. They're going to be in space by then, aren't they? That's what they're all doing now, isn't it?
I mean, all the poor ones are going to be dead, right? And so, I mean, like, the gene pool of the human race will be in tatters at that stage.
Very optimistic, Roger. Let's go for total destruction then.
I always like to end on a positive.
Maybe they'll be wiped out by some variant of this, another zoonotic pandemic.
You never know, do you? Right, well, it's almost 7:30, folks. So that's Brian's food time.
Brian's time.
See, Wendy's getting a bit stressed now.
The one thing we haven't mentioned yet is how people can get your book, Benny. Where can they find it?
So thanks.
Yeah, this precious commodity. How can they get it?
So if you go on Amazon, you should be able to find it. I know if people are boycotting Amazon because they don't want to send resource into space or whatever, just message me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and I can.
Don't mind sending him out. Just don't bring him back.
Yeah. I can always send people a PDF for a little contribution to a sanctuary or something, which is what I've been doing. So just make a little contribution to a sanctuary of your choice or something, and I'll send you the PDF gladly so you can look at the book. But if you want to buy it, you can get the Kindle or get it off Amazon. Or hopefully when everyone gets back to normal, maybe I'll have some copies in person at some vegan events and that type of thing.
We don't want to get back to normal, Benny. We've had enough of normal. Actually, Russell branded something on Amazon just today, I think, because apparently they've now got an app with which they fire people.
Wow.
You don't get fired by a human being anymore. This app tells you you've got no job. So
nice.
Yeah, that's
classy.
Right, folks. Oh, that's a nice message there to probably end with.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, always good.
Billionaires to Mars. We have to send one gender to Mars and one gender to Venus, would we?
The irony is, when they were looking at what food the astronauts would have to eat to go to Mars, it was all vegan menus as well. They were developing some vegan pizzas to make the food more interesting for them, rather than just eating like the space meals, in little foil bags. They were developing a full vegan menu for them. A bit ironic.
Here's Laura not knowing how to please a guest panelist. Look,
thank you, Laura.
Yeah. Oh, Laura's lovely. Yeah, no, and someone else said I can't see it now, but someone else said I don't know if it was Michael actually saying really great information on today's show, which is obviously what you've been talking about in your book, Benny. So thank you.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
Yes, so I suppose it's time to say goodbye. Goodbye. We're leaving. Do you remember that one? Yeah, not many people remember that, will they? So, okay, folks. So we shall see you next week. Thanks so much, Benny, for all your work and being.
Yeah, thanks, Benny.
To answer these questions that we had for you. And, thanks so much. So, goodbye, everyone.
Thanks everyone for all the comments.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for sticking with us. Take care. Bye.